Have you ever felt like you're just swimming in information every single day? News, social media feeds, even just chats with friends. It's this constant, overwhelming wave. And the real question is, right, how do you cut through all that static? How do you figure out what's actually going on? Especially when, and this is the tricky part, what if your own brain is kind of, well, working against you without you even realizing it? So today, we're doing a deep dive. We're heading into this really fascinating territory of worldviews, cognitive biases, and what it really means to get past just knowing stuff and achieve deep understanding. Think of it like we're trying to map out those hidden policies in our own minds, and find a better compass for navigating, well, reality.
That's exactly the mission. We're going to explore how the things we believe really deeply can sometimes create these blind spots, make us completely miss evidence that contradicts what we think we know. So we'll look at how to spot those internal traps and, crucially, talk about some practical ways to cultivate a perspective that's more open, more nuanced, and genuinely more informed. We'll touch on some of the philosophy behind it all, which is super interesting, and then really pivot to the real-world stuff you can actually use.
Okay, let's start with that core challenge, though. This idea that the more certain we feel about our beliefs, the more our brains sort of automatically filter out things that don't fit. It's like we build this little comfort zone, right? An echo chamber of confirmation bias. One source we looked at put it pretty starkly. It leaves us feeling lost and blind. It's amazing how wanting certainty can actually make us see less.
It really is. And that danger, the danger of too much certainty, it crops up everywhere. There's this powerful saying, the road to the city of lies is paved with stones of certainty. And you see it in studies, too. Research on, economic forecasting, geopolitical stuff. It consistently shows the people who make better predictions, they tend to be less certain. They're more open to bringing in different viewpoints. So ironically, that rock-solid certainty can actually be a big red flag for bias.
Okay, but hang on. Is all certainty bad? I mean, I'm pretty certain the sun's going to rise tomorrow. I'm pretty certain gravity works. Those feel grounded, right?
Yeah.
Based on truth. So how do we tell the difference? Where's the line between, helpful certainty and the kind that just leads you astray?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the core of it. True, like 100%, absolutely no doubt, possible certainty. We rarely get that just from looking at finite evidence. For those everyday things you mentioned, sun rising, gravity, our certainty matches the truth because the evidence is just overwhelming, consistent, the alternatives are basically non-existent. But the real wisdom, I think, is in leaving some room for doubt, especially when you run into these really surprising or totally against the mainstream certainties. If the evidence was really solid enough for that level of certainty, it probably wouldn't be so far from the mainstream view, right? It'd be one of those mundane facts. So when someone is absolutely unshakably certain about, say, a complex conspiracy theory, despite tons of counter evidence, that kind of certainty is often where bias has really taken hold. It's suspect.
Right. Okay. So that super strong certainty, especially on complex stuff, can be a warning sign. Let's unpack this more then. If certainty can signal bias, what exactly are cognitive biases? Like when our brain takes these shortcuts, what's actually happening? Why are they errors?
Right. So at its heart, a cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking. It's often just our brain's way of, taking a shortcut, or rule of thumb, or what psychologists call a heuristic. It helps us process information quickly, make decisions when the world is super complex. But it's important to separate them from, say, logical fallacies. A fallacy is an error in an argument, in the logic itself. A bias is more about how our brains process the information in the first place. It comes from limits in our memory or attention or how we perceive things. And here's the thing. Everyone has them. Everyone shows cognitive bias. It's usually way easier to spot in other people, though. Seeing them in ourselves, that's the real challenge.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So how do you even start to notice if you're, being influenced by a bias? Are there common signs we should look out for in ourselves?
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely some telltale signs, like if you notice you consistently only click on news stories or pay attention to information that just confirms what you already think, that's confirmation bias right there. Or if you always blame outside stuff for your failures, the traffic was awful, that's why I was late, but you take all the credit when things go well. Yeah, I nailed that presentation because I'm just really good. That's self-serving bias. Ever find yourself just assuming most other people think the same way you do, even on really complicated issues? That's the false consensus effect.
Yeah.
And, this one's classic. You learn just a little bit about something, maybe watch a couple of videos, and suddenly you feel like an expert. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, a little bit of knowledge makes you way overconfident.
Oh, man. I think we've all been there. Guilty as charged. What are some other common ones? It feels like there must be dozens.
There really are. It's a huge field. But just to give you a feel for the range, there's actor-observer bias, where you explain your own actions by the situation, but others' actions by their personality. Anchoring bias, that's where you get stuck on the first piece of information you hear. Attentional bias is focusing only on certain things, ignoring others. The availability heuristic makes us overestimate the importance of information that just pops into our head easily. Functional fixedness is when you can only see an object being used in its usual way, like you can't see a brick as a doorstop.
Right.
The halo effect, where if you like one thing about someone, you assume everything else is great too. The misinformation effect, where later information changes your memory of an event. And optimism bias, where we tend to think good things are more likely to happen to us than bad things. And what's really important to remember is that these biases often don't work alone. They can combine and interact, influencing your thinking in really complex ways, makes them even sneakier.
So why do we have them?
Yeah.
It almost sounds like our brains are deliberately trying to mess with us.
Well, not deliberately trying to mess with us, maybe, but they often come from those mental shortcuts, the heuristics we mentioned. They're like brain energy savers in a world that throws tons of information at us. Our emotions play a huge part too. So do our motivations, just the basic limits on how much we can process, and even social pressures wanting to fit in. And interestingly, some research suggests biases can actually increase as we get older, maybe due to less cognitive flexibility.
Huh. That's interesting about age.
Right.
But you said they're shortcuts. Does that mean they're always bad?
Yeah.
Or can they sometimes
Wow.
be useful?
That's a really important point. And no, they're not always bad in a practical sense. They can actually be adaptive. They help us make super quick decisions, which can be vital. I mean, think about it. You're walking alone at night. You see a shape in a dark doorway that looks kind of like a person lurking. A bias might make you instantly feel fear and cross the street. Even if it turns out it was just, I don't know, a weirdly shaped bush, that quick biased reaction could save you if it had been a threat. Our ancestors probably relied on that kind of fast thinking for survival.
Okay, that makes sense. Survival shortcuts. So if our default mode often leans towards this certainty and we've got all these biases nudging us, how do we actually move towards a better, more accurate picture of reality? This seems like where deep understanding comes in, which sounds like much more than just knowing facts.
Exactly. And let's really draw that distinction. Knowledge can be just, memorizing isolated facts, like knowing hydrogen is the first element on the periodic table. Fine. But deep understanding, that goes way beyond. It's about really exploring something in depth, grasping the nuances, seeing how different pieces connect and influence each other. It's much more of a process, not a final destination. It keeps leading you to new questions, pushing you to the edge of what you know.
And why is that so important? Why push for that deeper level, especially now?
Oh, for so many reasons. First, it gives you genuine confidence, which feels way better and is more useful than just shaky, surface-level knowing. Second, it massively boosts your critical thinking. You start spotting patterns, predicting how things might unfold, solving problems in ways just knowing facts won't let you. Third, it actually fuels creativity. When you understand the underlying structures, you can make new connections, see things in totally fresh ways. Ultimately, it leads to better performance, real mastery in whatever you're learning. And maybe the coolest part, it opens you up to lifelong learning because the more you understand, the more you realize how much you don't understand. It sparks curiosity.
Connecting this back, it feels like this isn't exactly a brand new idea, right? The ancient Greeks seem to be onto this.
Oh, absolutely. The philosophical roots here are really deep. That ancient Greek word, episteme, we often translate it as knowledge, but a lot of scholars argue it's much closer to our idea of understanding. For Plato, for Aristotle, episteme wasn't just having true beliefs. It meant having a systematic grasp, understanding the cause, the explanation, the why behind something, not just collecting facts. It was about grasping fundamentals, seeing the logical connections. It really pushes back against just, fact-checking isolated claims, which is so common today.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how philosophy kind of shifted away from that for a while, more towards just focusing on propositional knowledge. Is this statement true or false? Maybe it was skepticism or the religious wars, making people focus on just verifying individual claims.
Right. There was definitely a shift. But understanding has made a real comeback in modern philosophy. You have thinkers like Catherine Elgin, who argues that big achievements in science, even in art, they're really aiming for understanding, not just collecting known facts. And Jonathan Fanvig makes a strong case that understanding has its own special kind of value, epistemically speaking, maybe even more valuable than just knowledge. But this brings up that tricky thing, the feeling of understanding. We all know that aha moment.
That's that eureka feeling.
Exactly. But Henk Darreg pointed out something crucial. that subjective feeling. It's not the same as genuine understanding. I mean, someone deep into a conspiracy theory can feel that aha moment when a flimsy explanation seems to tie everything together for them. But that feeling doesn't mean their understanding is accurate or based on reality. So the feeling isn't required for understanding, and having the feeling doesn't guarantee you actually understand. Think about predicting coin flips. Getting it right a bunch of times might feel like understanding, but it's just luck. There's no grasp of probability there.
Okay, so the feeling is unreliable. Got it. Let's dig into the mechanics then. When we achieve deep understanding, what are we actually understanding? What's the object of it?
Generally, philosophers talk about the objects of understanding as being connections or relations. There are kind of two main ways to think about this. One is internalism. This focuses on grasping the connections within our own set of beliefs, how they hang together logically, the inferences we can draw. It's about the coherence of our mental map. The other is externalism. This says we're grasping real relationships out there in the world independent of our minds, things like cause and effect or how one thing depends on another. There's also this really neat idea of understanding involving possibility spaces. It means understanding isn't just knowing what is true, but seeing where something fits in a whole network of possibilities. What could be true, what would happen if things were different. Like a chess grandmaster, right? They don't just see the current board state. They see potential futures, lines of play, how changing one piece ripples through the possibilities.
I really like that chess analogy.
Yeah.
That clarifies it. So like a map of Midtown Manhattan's the vehicle we use, but Midtown itself, the streets, the buildings, the flow of traffic, that's the object we're trying to understand. Our mental models are the vehicles.
Exactly. Perfect analogy. And that leads nicely into the psychology of understanding. It seems to involve abilities that go beyond just believing something is true. It involves grasping or seeing connections. Think about a really good car mechanic. They understand engines not just because they know facts about spark plugs. They understand because they can apply that knowledge to diagnose a new problem. They can anticipate how adjusting one thing will affect the whole system. They appreciate how the underlying structures, like the causal relationships in the engine, actually work. It's about being able to mentally manipulate those structures, run simulations in your head.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's dynamic. It's that ability to predict and apply. Okay, but then there's this idea of normativity. Does it matter how you got your understanding? Like, for knowledge, your source has to be reliable. But understanding, it seems like it can tolerate certain kinds of luck, maybe?
It does, yeah, but only certain kinds. So for knowledge, if you just accidentally guess the right answer, that's not knowledge, that's Gettier-style luck. Understanding seems a bit more resilient. It can tolerate what philosophers call environmental luck. So imagine you're surrounded by bad information, but you just happen to latch onto the one reliable source and build a correct, coherent understanding from it. Most would say you did gain understanding there, even though it was lucky you found that source. But it can't tolerate Gettier luck. You can't just, throw a dart at a bunch of explanations, happen to hit the right one purely by chance, and call that understanding. You still need to have genuinely grasped the connections yourself through the right kind of process.
Okay, that distinction is helpful. So let's make this practical. If you listening, want to actively challenge those biases and really work toward this deeper understanding, what can you actually do? What are the steps?
Okay, actionable stuff. First, and this sounds simple, but it's foundational, get genuinely curious. You have to actually want to understand it. Ask questions, seek out new info, actively try to see it from different angles, even perspectives that feel uncomfortable at first. Second, and it may be obvious but crucial, read about it a lot. Dig into the history, the research, how it plays out in the real world, and read from diverse sources. Keep an open mind, even if you initially disagree. It's not about flip-flopping, but about widening your view.
And something I personally find super helpful here is, write it down, taking notes, especially by hand, seriously helps process information and lock it in memory. Then going back over those notes helps you see connections. Even just doodling while you learn can engage your brain differently.
Totally agree. Building on that, the fourth tip, explain it to someone else. Try to articulate what you know. Teaching, or even just recording yourself talking it through, is amazing for revealing your own blind spots and strengthening your grasp. If you can't explain it simply, maybe you don't understand it deeply enough yet.
Feynman technique. Right?
Exactly. And finally, maybe the most powerful, put it into action. Actually do the thing. That's often the fastest path to deep understanding. If you're learning about project management, manage a small project. If it's about cooking, get in the kitchen. If it's coding, build a little program.
And these tips, they loop right back into tackling bias, don't they? It's learning and self-correction.
Precisely. Just being aware of your biases, that's step one. And research backs this up. Training on bias awareness can actually reduce their impact, maybe by around 29%, which is significant. But awareness isn't enough. You have to actively challenge yourself, constantly ask, okay, what might I be missing here? Am I leaning towards this conclusion just because it feels familiar or confirms what I want to believe? It's like a gentle, ongoing internal audit. And when you encounter bias in others, the key is usually respect and curiosity, not just calling them out. Maybe present facts gently, ask questions that encourage them to see other viewpoints, look for common ground. Try not to just assume bad intentions if someone's view seems totally baffling. Often, it's just a different starting point or way of processing things. Assume good faith if you want a productive conversation.
That's such a crucial point for actual dialogue. Okay, so building on deep understanding, challenging bias, how do we apply all this to the really big, messy, complex problems? The ones with no easy answers. This seems like where systems thinking comes into play. Can you define that for us?
Yeah, systems thinking is basically a way of looking at complex problems holistically. Instead of just focusing on individual parts in isolation, you examine how all the parts are interconnected and influence each other within a larger system. It's both a mindset and a set of tools.
Can you give us a concrete example? Where would this approach really make a difference?
Okay, think about something like traffic jams in a city. A really narrow view might just say, build more roads. Simple solution, right? But a systems thinking approach would make you step back and look at the whole picture. What about public transport options? Is there good biking infrastructure? Why are people choosing to drive in the first place? Work hours, housing locations, cultural norms. What about traffic light timing, zoning laws? By seeing all those connections, you can find solutions that address the root causes, not just the symptoms. Things like better transit or incentives for off-peak travel, which might be way more effective and sustainable than just more asphalt.
And a big part of this, I gather, is reframing. Changing how you even ask the question, which can open up totally new solutions. I love that quote from Russell Ackoff. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. Really hits home how important framing is.
It's absolutely critical. And to help with that reframing, there's a useful analogy thinking like a photographer with three key mindsets. First is zooming in and out. Like photographers switching lenses, you learn to see the granular details in the big picture context. Let's stick with, say, food waste. If you zoom out, you might map all the players, farms, stores, restaurants, households, and see they're disconnected. So you reframe from, how can my household waste less, to maybe, how might we connect these players to create a more circular food system? Then you zoom in on households and ask, what are the specific barriers here? Maybe leading to an app that helps people use up fridge leftovers. The map itself isn't the answer, but zooming helps you ask better questions at different levels.
Right, constantly changing your focal length. That seems key to avoiding getting stuck. What's the second mindset?
Second is shifting perspective. This is like the photographer walking around taking shots from different angles. It helps you see dynamics you'd miss from one spot. Imagine a team where engineers complain about vague requirements and marketing complains about slow development. Shifting perspectives helps reframe from whose fault is this to how might we improve communication and align our timelines better across both teams. You can even use analogies here. Thinking about food waste like unwanted clothing might spark ideas about upcycling or redistribution, reframing it from trash to a potential resource.
And the third one, this feels like it connects directly back to our bias discussion.
It really does. It's often the hardest. Being aware of your own lens. Just like a photographer has their preferred style, their specific gear, we all bring our own baggage, our experiences, our identities, our professional training, which shapes how we see things. You know, the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. An HR person sees HR problems. An engineer sees technical problems. Our mental models can be invisible prisons. So you have to actively ask, what are my assumptions here? What biases might my background bring? For that food waste expert, it might mean challenging the assumption that everyone cares deeply about waste, or that caring automatically leads to action. That self-reflection can lead to totally different framings, like how do we make reducing waste easy or fun or even profitable for people who don't care intrinsically?
That makes so much sense. It's like turning the lens back on yourself. Okay, for people listening who want to try this, maybe at work, what are the common roadblocks? Like, what if your boss or colleagues are hesitant?
Yeah, that's common. If you meet resistance, don't try to boil the ocean. Find allies, people who are already kind of curious or open. Really listen to the skeptic's concerns. Don't just dismiss them. Try small pilot projects to demonstrate value quickly. Quick wins can build momentum. And tell stories about successes, even small ones. For deciding what to change, break big ideas down. Focus on what's within your control or influence first. You don't have to fix the whole system overnight.
And what about that feeling of just organizational inertia? Big companies can be slow to change.
Absolutely. In that case, try leading with the outcomes everyone agrees on, rather than focusing on the systems thinking process itself. Frame it in terms of shared goals. And get people doing things together, collaborative workshops, mapping exercises. That shared activity builds common language and understanding much faster than just talking about systems thinking. And remember, the map or diagram is just a tool for learning. It's not the final answer. Don't get bogged down trying to perfect it. Use the mindsets. Zoom in out, shift perspective, check your lens whenever you feel stuck. It's okay to feel uncertain. Complex systems are uncertain. The goal is progress and insight, not instant perfection. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From the real dangers of feeling too certain and the sneaky ways bias works, all the way to the power of aiming for deep understanding and using systems thinking to see the bigger picture. What really emerges is that true understanding isn't a destination you arrive at. It's this ongoing journey, right? Constantly questioning, looking for connections, being willing to adjust your mental map as you learn more. It's a lifelong thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being ready, actually willing to change your perspective sometimes, embracing that uncertainty where it genuinely exists instead of forcing simple answers, and always trying to see those connections, the bigger picture. And this isn't just, some abstract intellectual exercise. These are really vital skills for making sense of the incredibly complex world we're all navigating. Gives you a real edge.
Which brings us to maybe a final thought, a question for you listening. What's one belief, maybe a deeply held conviction you have right now that if you were to really examine it, maybe through that systems thinking lens, questioning your assumptions, what new understanding might open up for you?